So you recently came out with a new kids book. That's what family's for. What motivated this?
Well, my last two books, Make America Healthy Again, Panic Attack, they were, a little bit more controversial, obviously more scientific. And this children's book, it just makes me feel happy looking at it, reading it, and I co authored it with my middle son, Hudson, who's 10 years old, loosely based off some events that may have happened in the Saphier household in the last year. But I wanted for this next project to be something that just feels good, not controversial. I want people to take this book, read it together as a family, and walk away just remembering how important family is and just having that warm, fuzzy feeling inside.
What was it like for Hudson? Because I know that he faced some medical challenges, and last year that started. What was this process like for him? Cathartic, fun? I imagine it was exciting for him.
Well, that's right. Hudson did get some bad news from a doctor last summer, and it really strengthened us as a family. Having two physician parents, they say that doctors make the worst patients. Well, parents make the worst patients when it comes to our kids. And, as a family, we became much tighter as a unit. And, we kind of canceled our entire social calendar and just refocused, where our priorities were. So when we decided to make the children's book, this was a way of, kind of channeling some of those emotions. Hudson has always been a good writer. He loves writing short stories, especially about monkeys. I don't know why. Those are his favorite characters to write about. But he always loved to do little comedies. And so we decided to make, hey, what about having a family of monkeys that maybe one of the little monkeys are going through something similar? And that's what we did with the book.
That's incredible. And I so relate to that. I have a 7 and a 10-year-old. And when my 7-year-old was just turning 6, she was diagnosed with scoliosis and, very severe scoliosis for her age range. And so we've been navigating that the last, year and a half. And it really changes everything when you have something happen that is life altering, that it requires, certain things that are going to change the way your day-to-day life looks like. And as a parent, that is a really difficult thing. I love what you said there about parents kind of being the worst patients because you're struggling to do whatever you can to help your child, right? And I imagine you see this obviously in your work as well.
Oh, undoubtedly. Think about when we were in COVID, the amount of anxiety that we had, just the unknown. Well, when you're a patient, when you're a child, when you're the parent of a child and you're faced with a medical diagnosis, there's still that level of unknown. So while you are trying to deal with this diagnosis and what the future holds, you feel like you're completely out of control because you are for the most part. And you all of a sudden have to become very reliant on the medical experts and everyone else to kind of help guide you. And that's really hard to do.
It is. It is. And, you're writing this book and it has such a powerful and important message about family. And it comes at a really tricky and bizarre time in our culture, right? Where family, it feels like in some ways, family is under assault or under attack or being valued less. I mean, people might have different perspectives on what they think is happening, but it feels like something is very off in that arena. What are you hoping to sort of help speak into with this book?
Well, it's really interesting to the fact that you have parents who want to go to a school board meeting and talk about what their children are learning in school, and they're being called terrorists by some of our elected officials. I mean, that's a problem. All of a sudden, you have this society, and they're trying to separate parents from children. And when children are vulnerable at this young age, they shouldn't be separated from their children. It's not the time for them to be independent. It's the time for them to get those core values in them: faith, family, making sure their mental and physical health are the strongest that they possibly can be. And that's what we wanted to do with this book, is to bring people back to such a simple concept of family is everything. And everything outside of that is just noise, really. And as long as you have that strong family unit together, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through those challenges. You'll get through them together.
Yeah, and the book is That's What Family is For. And it's such an important message. I remember years ago, there were debates about this, whether or not there were certain organizations stepping in between children and parents. And, those conversations were happening. But now we're watching this happen at such a profoundly broad level. I mean, you mentioned the school board meetings. The other thing that happens at these school board meetings that I find so fascinating, just as a journalist, is when a parent comes up and they're reading a text and they're being told you need to stop reading that, it's too graphic. And then they say, well, this is what was read in my child's classroom. You just have to sort of scratch your head and also laugh and say, well, of course, that's the whole point. There are things maybe happening in some schools, not everywhere, that are problematic and that need to be addressed. But dismissing parents the way that we have is deeply troubling to me. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
Well, right. And parents are being dismissed, but it's all in this fight for social justice. And the way that I see things that are happening right now is they're fads. They are temporary. It will come and go. But unfortunately, it's going to have profound effects on the children that it's affecting in the moment. And so we as parents have to make sure that our children can come home to an environment and they maintain those values. They know what is right, what is wrong, and they know what is important moving forward. And that is something that's been reaffirmed in my family in the last year, really, is there's so much chaos going on around us. But as long as we come back and we are centered in our home, then I feel very comfortable with my family, my children, that they are getting the upbringing that they need.
Absolutely. No, and we won't get into this right now too deeply, but there are states that are enacting laws that, are very troubling, I think, for some families, around some of the more controversial issues, becoming sanctuary states for certain things where you really have to think, well, where does that line get drawn on parental rights? And so this is a major, major issue that we're seeing in culture. But I want to pivot a little bit and talk about something else. You're a doctor and you obviously have children and a family, but you deal with one of the most heartbreaking things, which is delivering cancer diagnoses to people. I mean, how do you cope and deal with that as a human being and as a doctor? Because that's a very difficult job.
I'd love to say it gets easier, but it certainly doesn't. And I have some good days and I have some pretty bad days. And as you point out, that I do that. I deliver a cancer diagnosis just about every single day in my day job. The good news is I tend to be able to tell them that we caught it early and this is what we're going to do to help you get through it. And so as long as I have that, this is the diagnosis, but don't worry, we've got you. Like that helps move it along. But I do come home at night, and some nights are harder than others. Sometimes I'm telling a very young woman who maybe has a newborn baby at home, or sometimes I'm telling a grandmother who is getting ready for her granddaughter's wedding in a few weeks, and she doesn't want to miss it. And thankfully, I have a husband who's also a physician. He sees tragedy every day as well, and so I guess there's comfort in numbers and we can understand each other and we're able to support each other very much. And our children, to be honest, hear some of our conversations. And so they have a very real perception of life. And that instills something that's important, a mantra in our household, that live every day like it's your last, because you have no idea what tomorrow is going to hold. You can live the healthiest life possible and bad things can still happen. So make sure that you are enjoying today because tomorrow is never guaranteed.
That's such a powerful way to live, and just last question on that, because I think for a lot of people, when they're in the line of work that you are, it can be really hard to hold on to faith. It can be hard to hold on to hope in light of that. How do you cling to those things in light of the position that you have?
I will tell you that there are most of the time, my hope and things happen the way that they're supposed to happen, that reigns true. But there are some times where I get disheartened and I get upset that I do see a very young, healthy woman who's really done everything she possibly could to just live the best life possible. And sometimes she gets diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer and nothing we do is working. And you just have to relinquish control and know that you've done everything to the best of your abilities. And just there's always going to be something out of your control. And just acknowledging that there's something bigger than you and there's something bigger than just science does create a level of comfort.
Absolutely. Now, I have to ask you, because you've been very vocal about a lot of issues and everything, no, which I love, because I think your perspective is not always heard. And that's been what's so troubling to me. Whenever there's a perspective that is not being heard and everybody's pushing a perspective out or they don't want to hear it, that is a sign to me that maybe we need to hear it, right? Like what is going on there that we're not allowing? And so luckily you've been able to speak out and have your perspective heard. But what has it been like the last couple of years as we come out of this fog of COVID with all of the crackdowns and shutdowns and with COVID itself, obviously wreaking havoc on so many families? What was it like to speak out and be so vocal on that as a physician?
Well, COVID was interesting for a lot of reasons. A lot of evolving information. By the hour, it felt like it was a humbling experience for certain. Things that I assumed to be true turned out not to be. And not just for me, but for a lot of people, common sense went out the window in the very beginning. Looking back now, it almost seems comical in the sense that, all right, we're talking about a coronavirus. I know all about coronaviridae. I've studied them for decades. So why were we so confused with this one in the beginning? Why didn't we know? Why did we scratch our heads with mode of transmission and the fact that we've never had a vaccine to effectively prevent transmission of a coronavirus? If we had, we would have stopped the common cold a long time ago. So that kind of went out the window for a while. But as I am very data driven and I read a lot. So all of my opinions are based off of data. And I was very comfortable speaking out against mainstream media talking points because it wasn't just hyperbole I was speaking, it was based off of myself reviewing literature and data. And so I felt very comfortable in that. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't given flack for it or I wasn't criticized for it and name called and other things. But I was comfortable in it. And as long as I stay true to who I am and I believe in what I say, knowing that it is based off of evidence, then I have no problem going against what the popular talking points are. My book Panic Attack, the one that came out during COVID, I started writing that in 2020. And it came out in early 2021. And there's an entire chapter dedicated to the evidence pointing to how the virus may have originated from that Wuhan Institute of Virology. It wasn't politicized. It wasn't against President Biden or for President Trump or anything of the sorts. It was just like, hey, guys, wow, look at all of this evidence. It's just too great not to consider the possibility that this is where it came from. There was no hyperbole written in that book whatsoever. It was all fact based. But I had hit articles about me from many journalists essentially saying that I'm a conspiracy theorist. And, it was interesting. It was definitely a learning curve.
Were you scared at all professionally? I mean, you're a very well-respected doctor and professor, and you're saying things that are based on data. Were you concerned about your role, your position, your livelihood in light of the intense sort of reaction from people?
Well, certainly. And obviously, a lot of my colleagues and people we've seen on social media were they were shadow banned, they were censored. You couldn't even find them anymore. I rely on my day job for an income. And I'm well aware of that every day. And that comes into play into what I will and will not say, unfortunately. Now, no, I don't get any royalties from Big Pharma or anything else, even though people love to think I do. I do not. But my day job working in a hospital, I depend on that salary. And so I would have to be very careful at what I said because a lot of what I said went against what some of my own hospital's policies were. And so, that's tough.
Do you feel vindicated at all, just as a last question on this, in light of, and again, nobody's perfect. There were things we all did. I mean, I was wiping everything down that I'd order pizza and wipe the box down like a crazy person, But do you feel vindicated in any areas based on what we now know and what is seemingly coming out?
I felt very comfortable in what I said back then. I believed it to be true. And now that a lot of it, maybe not everything, but a lot of what I had said turned out to be true. Yeah. Do I do a little happy dance every now and then? Sure. I personally love when people send the article and they're like, you said this years ago. I'm like, yes, I know. But again, I felt comfortable back then. There's been no revelation, in my opinion, in the last couple of years. The data's all been there. It's just a matter of time before people have to acknowledge it.
Well, I so appreciate you, taking on some other questions here because the book that we were here to talk about was That's What Family is For. People can head over to Brave Books, grab that book. Thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.